I never imagined that the sharpest knife would not be in my bakery, but in my own son's mouth. Mom, you're embarrassing us. Could you just sit down? Daniel's voice cracked through the restaurant like the blade of a bread cutter. The clinking of glasses stopped. Chairs froze mid-shift. For a split second, even the piano in the corner seemed to choke on its notes. I stood there, holding the cake I had baked myself, 3 layers of vanilla sponge, frosted with buttercream and raspberries. My hands, still faintly perfumed with butter and sugar, trembled as if I had been caught stealing. I forced a smile, though my lips felt glued together. 70 years old, and I suddenly didn't know where to put my eyes, my hands, my body. The cake knife slid slightly, clattering against the porcelain plate, a metallic scream that drew every gaze tighter on me. Daniel's face was flushed, not with affection but with irritation. His wife, Claire, sat beside him, her manicured fingers curling around a champagne flute, her eyes fixed on me with thinly veiled disdain. I tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of overcooked steak and spilled wine. The restaurant lights were far too bright, spotlighting me as if I were the clown in a cruel performance. I whispered, "I'm sorry," though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for singing along too loudly when the waiter played Happy Birthday on the piano, for daring to laugh with my old friends who had come to celebrate me, for being 70 and still believing that family meant safety. Daniel leaned back, shaking his head like a man burdened by a foolish parent. "Please," he muttered, softer but sharper still, "just stop drawing attention." The words stabbed deeper than any kitchen accident I'd ever had. I once burned my arm on a 400-degree oven door, the blister lasting weeks. But this wound, it carved straight into my chest, leaving no bandage that could cover it. I looked around the table. My friends, some from the neighborhood, some from the book club I had just joined, stared at their plates. No one dared defend me, not against my own son. My knees wobbled under the weight of 70 years, yet I remained standing, clutching the cake knife like a soldier gripping a weapon he no longer knew how to use. I wished, absurdly, that I was back in my bakery, the little shop I had run for 35 years, where the scent of fresh bread filled the air each dawn, where people looked at me with smiles, not scorn. There, every ting of the oven timer meant creation, not humiliation. Here, the only sound was silence, thick and punishing. I cleared my throat, the words scraping. It's your mother's birthday, Daniel. I only wanted to, Mom." He cut me off, voice stern, jaw tight. "Please, enough." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not with drama, more like a crack in old porcelain, small but fatal. I set the cake down, the plate clinking dully against the table. My hands, still sticky with sugar, left faint smudges on the white linen cloth. I had pictured this birthday for months. My son raising a glass, thanking me for the sacrifices I had made, maybe even hugging me the way he used to when he was little. Instead, I was standing in the ruins of that fantasy, my dignity spilled on the floor like broken eggs. The buttercream roses I had so carefully piped onto the cake seemed mocking now, too sweet for such a bitter moment. I swallowed hard, but the lump in my throat refused to go down. My vision blurred, whether from age, from tears, or from sheer disbelief, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that in that instant, surrounded by laughter that had died, I felt utterly alone. 70 years. Decades of kneading dough at 4 in the morning, hands cracked from flour and heat, saving every dollar to give Daniel the best, his education, his home, his comforts, and here he was, looking at me not as a mother, but as an inconvenience, an embarrassment. My chest tightened. My heart pounded, not with love, but with the hollow thud of betrayal. I wanted to shout. I wanted to slam the knife on the table and demand he remember the countless birthdays I had made magical for him with cakes pulled fresh from the oven. But no words came, just silence, heavy and humiliating. I sank slowly into my chair, the room spinning slightly, my ears filled with the muffled clatter of cutlery resuming, conversations restarting, the world pretending nothing had happened. But I knew something had happened. Something had ended. And in the quiet storm of my humiliation, a thought whispered in my mind, cold and merciless. Ari, I never imagined that after 70 years, the deepest pain I would feel would not come from illness or age, but from the only son I thought I could trust. The morning has always belonged to me. For 35 years, I rose at 4 a.m., long before the city stirred. The world was silent except for the whisper of flour pouring into bowls, the hum of mixers, and the steady rhythm of my hands kneading dough. Sweet Morning. That was the name painted on the glass of my bakery. To most customers, it was just a cozy little shop where they could pick up fresh bread and pastries before work. To me, it was the axis around which my entire life spun. The air was always thick with the scent of yeast rising, warm and alive. By the time the sun peeked over Boston's rooftops, trays of croissants lined the shelves, their golden layers catching the light. Customers trickled in, yawning, smiling, murmuring thanks as they cradled paper bags warm against their chests. And each time the oven timer rang with its familiar stinker, it felt like a bell of purpose. But behind every loaf, every tart, every carefully iced cake, there was another goal. Daniel. I saved every dollar I could for him. The bakery wasn't glamorous. Some days I cleared less than 200 after rent, utilities, and supplies, but I pushed on. Over time, those long mornings and flour-cracked hands became tuition checks, late-night study sessions, and a future I believed would outshine my own. By the time Daniel was accepted to Harvard, I had already saved over $200,000. I remember the day vividly. The acceptance letter in his trembling hands, his eyes wide with joy. He hugged me so tightly I could smell the ink of the letter on his shirt. "Mom, you're the best," he whispered, almost breathless. "I'll make you proud." My palms were still dusted with flour, but I cupped his face and kissed his cheek. That's all I want. It didn't matter that I would have to take on extra shifts or that I'd go home smelling like yeast and sugar every night. My boy was going to Harvard. That was my victory as much as his. 4 years turned into 6 as graduate school followed. The bills piled higher: textbooks, rent, endless tuition fees. Each time I transferred money, I told myself it was worth it. Each time I stood before the oven, waiting for that familiar ting, I imagined the sound echoing into his future, a bell announcing that another barrier had been broken. When Daniel graduated, I cried so hard I could barely see him cross the stage. Not just because I was proud, but because I believed, foolishly, that every sacrifice was finally complete. But sacrifices have a way of multiplying. When he married Claire, they wanted a house, a real one, not a cramped apartment. I signed over a check for $120,000, my savings for retirement, just to cover the down payment. I told myself, they're starting their lives. I can work a few more years. I can manage. T. I remember standing at the stove the next morning, kneading dough with aching wrists, and hearing the oven timer go off again. Ting. The sound no longer felt like purpose. It felt like surrender. Still, I smiled. I delivered cakes to neighbors, bread to regulars, pastries for children with sticky fingers. I worked until the skin on my hands cracked, until my knees screamed from standing too long. Every cent went to them. Years blurred together. Flour, sugar, yeast, money. Give, give, give. Always with the hope that love would circle back. That one day Daniel would look at me with the same gratitude he'd had when he was 22, when he had called me the best. But somewhere along the way, his words changed. Requests became expectations. Gratitude became silence. And the oven's ting, once a hymn of creation, became a chain I couldn't break. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit alone in the bakery after cleaning up, my apron stiff with dried flour. I would close my eyes and inhale the fading scent of bread, as if breathing in all those lost years. I told myself it was worth it. That's what mothers do. They give and give and give again. But now, at 70, I can see the ledger of my life clearly. H, 200,000 for Harvard. Office, 20,000 just for a home. Sock, countless monthly transfers, thousands upon thousands, all gone like flour dust in the wind. The bakery walls are silent now, but in my memory, the timer still rings. Ting, 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 over and over, echoing the sacrifices that shaped not just bread, but my entire existence. I thought love was measured in loaves, in checks, in tuition bills paid on time. I thought the smell of fresh bread could cover the scent of resentment building quietly in my chest. But looking back, I realize the tink of the oven wasn't just bread ready to serve. It was me ready, always ready, never refusing, never resting, until there was nothing left of me but the sound of giving. After the birthday humiliation, I didn't go home. Instead, I found myself unlocking the rusty door of my old bakery. Sweet morning. The sign had faded. The once cheerful blue letters were peeling. Inside, the air was thick with silence and the faintest trace of flour that seemed to have soaked into the very walls. The ovens were cold now, lifeless. Their steel doors, once glowing with heat, reflected back only my own weary face. I pulled up a chair, sat down in the empty shop, and let the weight of 70 years settle onto my shoulders. I stared at the old mixer in the corner, its bowl scratched from decades of use. I remembered my hands plunging into dough at 4 a.m. Daniel, sleeping upstairs, his small body curled under blankets I had washed 100 times. Every loaf, every croissant, every cake I had made had been, in some way, for him. And yet, at my birthday, all he could say was that I embarrassed him. I pressed my palms against my knees. The smell of butter and sugar still clung faintly to my skin, as if mocking me. I gave him my entire life, and all I received in return was shame. The words rose in my mind, bitter as burnt coffee. I thought of the monthly transfers, 3,000, like clockwork, money I had once gladly sent, because what was the point of saving if not for my child? But lately, each time the notification pinged on my phone, my stomach tightened. It wasn't generosity anymore. It was obligation, expectation, even demand. And I asked myself right there in that empty bakery, if I keep going, what will be left of me? SATA. The answer was clear. Nothing. Just a hollow shell of a woman, drained of dignity, drowned in invoices and guilt. I pulled out my old checkered notebook, half recipe book, half ledger. I flipped through pages filled with neat handwriting, numbers scribbled beside measurements of flour and sugar. 1 lb, 2 Oz, 5.99 for yeast. Every cent mattered back then. Every cent was earned by my hands. Now, thousands slipped away each month, not with gratitude, but with disdain. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams where the smell of bread still lingered. No, I whispered to the empty shop. I can't let myself disappear like this. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something new, resolve. I took out my phone, opened the banking app. My finger hovered over the screen. For a moment, doubt slithered in. What if Daniel hates me? What if he cuts me off completely? What if I end up alone? But then another thought, louder, steadier. Sam, I already am alone. If love depends on $3,000 a month, then it isn't love at all. ESA. My hand shook as I navigated to the scheduled transfers tab. I saw his name, ADNL Wilson, 3,000 line, month. Esther, the line stared back at me like a chain. I clicked cancel. The app asked for confirmation. Are you sure? I laughed through my tears. Am I sure? I've never been sure of anything. With one last press, the transfer was gone. A strange quiet filled the room, as if the bakery itself had sighed with relief. The ovens, the mixer, the shelves, they all seemed to watch me, witnesses to a woman who had finally done something for herself. I sat there, breathing deeply, letting the silence wash over me. My hands no longer trembled. My chest felt lighter, as though I had set down a burden I didn't realize I was carrying. I whispered to the walls, to the ghosts of 1,000 loaves. For the first time in my life, I chose to let the money stay put, and my heart finally moved. It was exactly 1 week after my 70th birthday when the knock came. Not the polite kind of knock either. It was sharp, impatient, rattling against the glass door of my shuttered bakery. I had come here almost every day since the party, as if the empty shop could comfort me more than my own house. The chairs were stacked, the shelves bare. Only one small table remained near the window. A table where Daniel once sat as a boy, swinging his legs, licking frosting from his fingers. Now he stood outside as a man, taller, heavier, his face hard. Beside him, Claire's silhouette was neat, poised, her heels clicking against the pavement. I hesitated before unlocking the door. My heart thudded, but I forced myself to twist the key. The door creaked open. Daniel didn't waste time. He stepped inside, the smell of dust and faint yeast wrapping around him. "Where's the money, Mom?" he demanded. The words hit like a slap, though his tone was flat, almost businesslike. No greeting, no warmth, just expectation. I steadied my breath. "It stays with me now." His eyes narrowed. Claire glided in, her perfume sharp against the stale air. She folded her arms, tilting her head in a gesture I had seen too many times, judgment disguised as pity. "So you'd rather see us struggle than help your own son?" she asked, her voice smooth but poisonous. Something inside me snapped into place. My back straightened. My palms no longer trembled. "I baked bread for half this city," I said slowly, each word like a stone laid down with care, but I refused to be kneaded and pulled apart anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the cracked walls. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't be dramatic. This isn't about bread. It's about responsibility." "Responsibility?" I echoed. "I carried responsibility every day of my life, raising you, running this shop, paying your tuition, covering your mortgage. I shouldered responsibility until my bones ached. Now tell me, whose responsibility is it to respect a mother?" He shifted, looking momentarily unsettled, but Claire placed a manicured hand on his arm. "Let's cut to the chase," she said briskly. From her bag, she pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Paper spilled out, crisp and white against the old wood scarred by years of flour and knives. "It's a power of attorney. All very standard. Just sign, Margaret. It'll make things easier for everyone." I stared at the papers, my stomach churning. My hands still smelled faintly of flour that had seeped into my skin over decades. Slowly, I pushed the folder back toward her. "No!" Daniel's face darkened. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "I've already made everything too easy," I replied. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "Easy tuition, easy down payment, easy monthly checks. Maybe it's time life wasn't so easy for you." Claire's eyes flashed. "So this is punishment?" "Ah, no," I said, leaning forward, my hands flat on the table. "This is survival. Mine." Daniel slammed his fist down, making the papers jump. "You owe me," he shouted. My chest tightened, but not with fear, with fury. "Owe you?" I hissed. "I gave you my womb, my blood, my years. I gave you cakes for every birthday, shoes for every growth spurt, and a life I never had the chance to live. Don't stand here and tell me I owe you." The air vibrated with his anger. Claire tried to smooth it over, her tone syrupy. "Margaret, you're tired. You're old. Managing finances is stressful. Let us take care of things. Isn't that what family is for?" I laughed, bitter and raw. "Family is for love, not extraction." I looked at Daniel, really looked at him. His face was familiar but strange. carved by years of entitlement. I saw the little boy who once cried when he dropped his ice cream cone, who once kissed my cheek sticky with jam. And I saw the man who now stood before me demanding more, more, more. Sign it, he ordered, shoving the pen toward me. I picked it up. For a moment, he seemed relieved. Then I placed it back on the folder, untouched. No, I whispered again. His eyes burned. You'll regret this. Maybe, I admitted, but at least it will be Maya's regret, not yours. For a moment, no one spoke. The bakery walls seemed to lean closer, listening. Dust floated in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. I felt calm, almost serene, because I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of their anger, not of their threats, not of losing them. I had already lost them long ago, the day money became the currency of love. I pushed the folder fully back across the table. My fingers brushed the wood, worn smooth by decades of rolling dough. The smell of flour rose up, grounding me. They thought I only knew how to knead dough, I said quietly but firmly, but I also know how to shape my own fate. The words hung in the air like the toll of a church bell. Final. Irrevocable. Daniel's face twisted, a storm of rage and disbelief. Claire snapped the folder shut, her lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, they turned and walked out, heels and boots striking the floor in angry rhythm. The door slammed behind them, rattling the glass. Silence returned. I sank back into the chair, my heart racing but my hands steady. Outside, the world went on. Cars passing, people chatting, the city breathing. Inside, I sat in the ruins of my bakery, not as a broken mother, but as a woman who had finally drawn a line. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The first letter arrived folded neatly in a cream-colored envelope, as if bad intentions could be disguised by expensive stationery. It was from Claire's lawyer. The words inside were sharp, clinical, dripping with false concern. Given Margaret Wilson's advanced age, we have reason to believe she may no longer be of sound mind to manage her financial affairs. I read it twice, the phrases blurring into a single insult. Unsound, incapable, diminished. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. The smell of yeast clung to my fingertips. I had baked a small loaf earlier that morning, more for comfort than hunger. Now that same smell twisted in my stomach. So this was their plan, not only to drain me, but to erase me. That night I couldn't sleep. My house felt too quiet, each creak of the floorboard sounding like an accusation. At dawn, I walked back to the bakery, my sanctuary, just coated the counters, the ovens cold. I pressed the power button on one oven just to hear it hum. When the timer finally beeped with its familiar sting, tears burned my eyes. That sound had carried me through decades of exhaustion, and now it whispered, "Stand up." The next morning, I made an appointment with attorney Michael Green. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, a different kind of comfort than flour and sugar, but grounding in its own way. He was a tall man with graying hair, his suit slightly rumpled, his gaze sharp but kind. He flipped through the letter, his brow furrowing. Then he looked up. "Do you want to fight, Margaret?" I met his eyes. My hands, though wrinkled and scarred from years of kneading, no longer shook. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I needed dough my whole life. Now I'll need justice." For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of a smile cross his face. "Then we'll build this case like a recipe. Step by step. Evidence, witnesses, documentation. They want to call you incapable. We'll show them just how capable you are." The weeks that followed were filled with both fear and surprising solidarity. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. Old customers stopped by the bakery, even though it was closed, just to check on me. Maria, my neighbor from 2 doors down, brought me a tray of muffins and said, "If they dare say you're losing your mind, I'll tell the court how you still corrected my pie crust last Christmas." The women from my baking club rallied around me. "We'll testify," one said firmly. Every Thursday, you read recipes without glasses. You remember exact measurements better than any of us. Even the grocer who had supplied my flour for decades offered to help. I've watched you balance accounts to the penny. If that's not competence, I don't know what is. Each show of support was like a new ingredient tossed into the bowl, proof that I wasn't alone, that my life had been witnessed, validated, remembered. Claire, of course, did not back down. She and Daniel doubled their efforts, whispering about memory lapses and confusion. They gathered signatures from supposed acquaintances who barely knew me. But Michael was meticulous. He guided me through every step. We compiled bank statements showing decades of precise transactions, handwritten ledgers from the bakery, tax records spanning years. We collected video footage from neighbors' door cameras showing me unlocking my bakery at dawn, walking with steady purpose. One afternoon, Michael leaned back in his chair after reviewing the stack of evidence. "Margaret, you have more receipts than a corporation. If this goes to court, they'll choke on the proof." Still, there were moments when doubt clawed at me. Nights when I sat in the dark, the lawyer's letters spread out on my lap, their cruel words echoing louder than reason. Incompetent, incapable, senile. Each time I forced myself back to the bakery, I would power on the oven, stand in the quiet until the ting-ack rang out. That sound reminded me who I was. A woman who had risen before the sun, fed a city, built a life out of flour and fire. Then came the day I discovered the forged documents. Michael had obtained copies of the papers Claire's lawyer intended to present, supposed evidence that I had agreed to transfer my assets. My eyes caught on the signature at the bottom, a shaky scrawl of my name. But one detail betrayed the lie. The ink was blue. I had never signed important documents in blue. 35 years of invoices, contracts, and checks, all in black. I insisted on it. It was a small, stubborn quirk of mine, but it had become habit, ritual. "They think they can mimic me," I muttered, holding the paper up to the light. "But they don't know me at all." My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from fury. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was erasure, an attempt to rewrite my life in someone else's ink. The following week, we held a meeting with my potential witnesses. My bakery tables, usually covered in flour and sugar, were now stacked with files and binders. Maria poured coffee. The baking club ladies brought cookies. The air was thick with both sweetness and determination. "We're going to fight this," I told them, my voice stronger than I expected. "Not just for me, but for every older woman they think can be pushed aside." They clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Michael raised his mug of coffee. To Margaret, still sharp, still standing. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed it down. No tears. Not now. That night, back in the bakery, I sat by the oven once more. I set the timer, just for the comfort of it, and closed my eyes. When the familiar ting rang out, I whispered to the dark, "If a lifetime of flour couldn't break me, a few forged papers won't crush me either." The folder sat on my kitchen table, thick with papers Michael had requested from Claire's lawyer. I hadn't wanted to open it alone, but curiosity tugged at me stronger than fear. I flipped page after page, medical claims I didn't recognize, bank statements I knew by heart, but altered with clumsy edits. Then I saw it, a power of attorney form with my name scrawled across the bottom. At first glance, the signature looked almost right. My loops, my slant, my name stretched the way I'd written it 1,000 times. But something was wrong. I leaned closer. The ink. It wasn't black, it was blue. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. For 35 years, I had signed every invoice, every delivery slip, every bank check in black ink. I insisted on it. Suppliers joked about my superstition, but it was more than habit. It was control. In a world of flour dust and sticky sugar, black ink stood firm, consistent, undeniable. And now here it was, a forgery betraying itself by color. I picked up the paper, holding it to the light. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from fury. This wasn't just greed anymore, it was theft of identity, an attempt to rewrite my life with strokes of blue. I remembered signing invoices late at night, my fingers cramped, my apron still dusty, each one proof that I was precise, disciplined, alert. Each one proof that my mind was sharp enough to handle every dollar an ounce. They forgot, I whispered, clutching the paper, that every flower invoice I ever signed was proof I'm sharper than they think. The anger burned away the fear. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the hunter, holding the evidence that would turn the tide. In the weeks before the hearing, my life became a rehearsal. Every morning I stood before the mirror, shoulders squared, practicing answers to questions Michael said the opposing lawyer would throw at me. At first, my voice shook. I stumbled, second-guessed myself, eyes darting away from my own reflection. But repetition works like kneading dough. Push, fold, turn, again and again until the structure holds. By the 10th day, my voice had steadied. By the 20th, I could meet my own gaze in the mirror without flinching. I'm 70, not senile. I know where every cent of my money has gone. I may be old, but I am not invisible. The sentences grew stronger, sharper, like loaves rising tall in the oven. One afternoon, Maria and the ladies from my baking club arrived at the bakery. They carried boxes of cookies and small cakes, setting them on the empty counters. "Props," Maria said with a grin, "so you don't forget who you are when you speak." We arranged the pastries like exhibits in a trial. A pie to represent patience, a loaf to represent strength, a tray of eclairs for joy. We laughed at the absurdity, but behind the laughter was steel. They took turns firing questions at me, some gentle, some sharp. I answered them all, my voice growing louder each time. When one friend deliberately tried to trip me up, asking the same question in two different ways, I caught it, corrected her, and smiled. For the first time in months, I felt ready. That night, I wrote a single sentence on the bakery's chalkboard, the one that once held daily specials. I didn't rehearse to defeat my son. I rehearsed to defeat the fear of being invisible. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The courthouse smelled of polish and nerves. My shoes echoed across the marble floor as I followed Michael, my attorney, toward the chamber doors. My palms were damp, but not from fear alone. It was the weight of decades pressing down, begging for release. Inside, the courtroom hummed with a silence that wasn't silence at all. It was charged, heavy, waiting. Claire sat across from me in a sleek navy suit, her hair pinned flawlessly. Daniel sat beside her, jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. I folded my hands in my lap. My skin still bore faint traces of flour, no matter how many times I washed. That scent followed me even here, a stubborn reminder of who I was. The bailiff called us to order. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm presence, settled at the bench. Her gavel struck once. Bang! And the trial began. Claire's lawyer went first. He rose with practiced ease, his voice smooth as buttercream but laced with poison. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here because Margaret Wilson, though once a capable business owner, has reached an age where confusion, memory lapses, and poor judgment compromise her ability to manage significant finances." His words washed over me like acid. Confusion? Memory lapses? If only he knew how many invoices I had balanced to the penny while running on 2 hours of sleep. Claire dabbed her eyes delicately with a tissue, her performance flawless. "I'm worried for her," she said sweetly. "She forgets things. She repeats herself. It breaks my heart, but she needs help." Daniel nodded grimly, playing the concerned son. My stomach twisted. Michael rose slowly, his hand resting lightly on our pile of evidence. "Your Honor, the other side will paint Margaret as incapable. I will show you a woman who ran a business for 35 years, who supported her son through Harvard, who documented every cent of her life with precision. A woman who is not only capable, but remarkable." He opened the first binder, the bakery ledgers. The pages were thick with years of ink, every line in my hand. Dates, amounts, costs, 2 lbs flour, 128. 1 gallon milk, 325. Dozens of entries spanning decades, consistent and meticulous. Every day, Michael said, his voice rising, Margaret measured ingredients and money alike. She recorded every ounce, every dollar. This is not the work of a confused mind. This is the work of someone sharp, disciplined, exact. He held the ledger up so the judge could see. My chest swelled with both pride and grief. Those numbers weren't just figures. They were my life. Witnesses followed. First, Mrs. Thompson, a customer of 20 years. She leaned on her cane, but her voice was firm. Margaret never once mixed up my order. Every Friday, 2 loaves of sourdough and a cherry pie. Even last year, she remembered the exact glaze I liked. If that's memory loss, I'll eat my hat. Laughter rippled gently through the courtroom. Next, Maria from down the street. She smiled nervously, then straightened her shoulders. Last Christmas, she reminded me to lower my oven temperature when my pie crust burned. She knew the degrees by heart. My own recipe she remembered better than I did. Even the pharmacist spoke. Margaret manages her own prescriptions without issue. She asks sharp questions, tracks dosages precisely. If she were confused, I would be the first to know. Each testimony felt like a loaf rising higher, stronger, undeniable. Then it was my turn. My knees wobbled as I stood, but my hands were steady. Michael gave me a small nod. I stepped forward, facing the judge. For a moment, the courtroom blurred. I saw not walls, not faces, but decades of mornings at sweet morning. The hush of flour falling into bowls, the hum of mixers, the oven timer's ting. My entire life distilled into that one sound. I took a breath. I measured flour for 30 years. Every gram mattered. Don't tell me I can't measure my own life. My voice rang clear, echoing against the wood panels. Daniel flinched. Claire's lips tightened. I went on. I know where every dollar went. Into my son's tuition, into his home, into his life. And I can tell you the exact amounts: $200,000 for Harvard, $120,000 for his house, $3,000 a month, every month, until I finally said no. That isn't confusion. That's clarity. The judge's eyes met mine, steady, unreadable, but not unkind. Claire's lawyer tried to recover. He asked me tricky questions, dates, amounts, small details. I answered them all. The courtroom murmured as I recited numbers with ease, my memory as sharp as the day I baked my first loaf. Finally, he sputtered, "But surely you've forgotten things, haven't you?" I smiled faintly. Only things not worth remembering. Michael closed strong. He placed the forged power of attorney on the table. This is the paper they intended to use, he said, signed, supposedly, by Margaret. But the ink is blue, and for 35 years, every invoice, every contract, every check, black ink only. Ask any supplier in this city. This forgery is their proof, not ours. The lawyer across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Claire's face paled. Daniel stared at the floor. The judge leaned forward. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. This court finds that Margaret Wilson is fully competent to manage her finances. The petition for guardianship is denied. Assets remain under her sole control. Her gavel struck the bench. Bang. The sound reverberated in my chest, powerful, final. The sound of that gavel echoed like my oven's timer, ending one batch, beginning another. The courthouse victory felt surreal, like waking from a nightmare only to find the pillow still damp with tears. Everyone congratulated me. My lawyer, my friends, even strangers who had followed the case. Yet when the noise faded, what remained was silence. A silence that pressed against my chest, equal parts relief and grief. 2 weeks later, I returned to Sweet Morning for the last time. The bakery smelled faintly of dust and memories. The shelves were bare, the ovens cold. The glass counter, once filled with pastries, now reflected only my tired face. I had scrubbed this place for decades, every surface polished with equal parts flour and sweat. And now I was here to say goodbye. The realtor's papers were ready. The new owners, a young couple with bright eyes and dreams, would take over tomorrow. They had promised to keep the name, though they would add their own touches. I told them that was good. A bakery should live, even if under different hands. I walked slowly through the space, letting my fingers trail along the walls. Each corner held a story. Here, Daniel had sat on a stool as a boy, legs swinging, licking icing from his fingers. There, I had burned my wrist on the oven door, the scar still faint on my skin. At the back, I had cried quietly the day my husband left, hiding tears in the sound of mixers. The ting of the oven timer echoed in my memory. How many times had it called me back from despair, reminding me that bread was ready, that life moved forward? I carried a small box with me, just a few mementos. My black fountain pen, the one I used to sign every invoice, a chipped measuring cup, its numbers long faded but still etched into my muscle memory, and a scrap of chalk from the board that had once held daily specials. When I reached the front door, I held the soul sign in my hand. For a moment, I hesitated. My reflection in the glass looked older, yes, but not broken. My shoulders were straighter than they had been in years. I pressed the sign against the door. The tape crackled as it stuck, final and irreversible. I stepped back, taking it in. The word looked so small, so simple, yet behind it stretched 35 years of dawns, of dough, of sacrifice. My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but instead I smiled because I realized something. The trial hadn't just given me back my money. It had given me back myself. No longer a checkbook, no longer an embarrassment, no longer a shadow standing in her own life. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered to the empty shop, to the ghosts of every loaf I had ever made. Bread may be gone, but my life has only just begun to rise. After the trial, life did not transform overnight. Freedom is quieter than you imagine. It doesn't burst in with fanfare. It arrives gently, like sunlight through a dusty window. The first decision I made as a truly free woman was to sell the house. The large, echoing place where every corner reminded me of sacrifice, where every room hummed with absence. I no longer wanted hallways that stretched into loneliness or a kitchen too big for one person. I sold it without regret, and with the money, I bought a small apartment by the Mediterranean, a place where the sea painted the horizon in endless blues. The balcony was narrow, but when I stepped onto it, the air smelled of salt and rosemary, not flour and exhaustion. For the first time in decades, I woke without an alarm. No 4 a.m. kneading, no buzzing ovens. Instead, I let the rhythm of waves decide my mornings. I signed up for a painting class in the village. The brushes felt strange in my hands at first, hands used to rolling pins and measuring cups. But soon, colors spilled across canvas the way dough once spread across counters. I didn't know I had this in me, I admitted one afternoon, smudging blue into white to make the suggestion of clouds. My teacher, a kind woman with paint always dotting her clothes, smiled. You spent years shaping bread. Now you're shaping light. It's not so different. Her words struck me deeply. I had always measured, kneaded, baked for others. Now I created for myself. I joined a book club, too. Once a week, we gathered in a cafe overlooking the harbor. We argued about novels, laughed over characters, sometimes cried at endings. I made friends who didn't care about my bank account, my past bakery, or the lawsuit that had scarred me. To them, I was simply Margaret Reader, painter, friend. There was freedom in anonymity, in starting over without baggage. And then, one morning, I found myself on the balcony with a cup of coffee. The sea breeze swept my hair back, cool and playful. Above me, a small wind chime I had bought at the market tinkled softly. Ting, ting, ting. The sound froze me. For 35 years, the ting-shig of the oven timer had been the metronome of my life. Wake up, knead, bake, deliver, repeat. Each tink meant labor, sacrifice, obligation. Now, the tinga of the chime was something else entirely. It was not a demand. It was not a burden. It was music, light, a reminder that I owed nothing to anyone except myself. I closed my eyes, breathing in the salt air, and felt something unfurl inside me, a peace I had never known. Some nights, memories still tug at me. I see Daniel as a boy, legs swinging from the bakery stool, sugar dusting his smile. I wonder if he thinks of me, if regret ever scratches at his conscience. But I don't dwell. Love cannot be forced, and dignity cannot be bought back once sold. My future is not behind me. It stretches out, page after page, like a novel I finally get to write for myself. I spend my days painting seascapes, baking only when I feel like it. I donate loaves to neighbors, not because I must, but because I want to. The difference is everything. And sometimes, late at night, I sit on the balcony with a book in my lap, listening to the waves and the chime. The world no longer feels like something I must endure. It feels like something I can savor. Looking back, I realized the trial was never just about money. It was about reclaiming authorship of my own story. For too long, I had been a side character in my son's tale, the supporting cast who provided without question. Now, I am the protagonist of my own life. It took 70 years, but finally, I am free. I sip my coffee, watch the sunlight stretch across the water, and smile. I lost a greedy family, I whisper to the breeze, but I found a life of peace, like a book finally closed. If you have walked with me this far, then you already know my story is not just about bread or money or even betrayal. It is about dignity. It is about the moment you decide that enough is enough. So let me look at you now, not as a stranger, but as someone who understands pain, who understands sacrifice, who maybe, just maybe, has been where I once stood. If one day your loved ones humiliate you, will you swallow it or will you rise? I can't answer for you. I can only tell you what it felt like for me. The sting of shame in a restaurant filled with silence. The weight of papers shoved across a table demanding my signature. The loneliness of realizing my own child saw me as a wallet instead of a mother. Those wounds don't disappear easily. They scar. But scars are proof of survival, not defeat. I never imagined, at 70, I would begin again. I thought my story was written, baked, and served. Yet here I am, living in a place where the sea sings me awake, where the chime of the wind replaces the timer of an oven, where I paint, read, and laugh without fear of what anyone thinks. And if I can rebuild from humiliation, then so can you. Thank you for walking with me to the very end. Thank you for listening to a woman who once believed silence was safer than standing up. If nothing else, let my story remind you, you are not defined by the money you give, but by the love you keep for yourself. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not too old, too weak, or too late. I will leave you with one simple request. Share this story. Share it with someone who feels trapped, who feels small, who has been told they don't matter. Because courage is contagious, and sometimes all it takes is one voice, one story, to remind another person that they too can rise. So please pass this along. Let it travel further than my bakery ever could. I lost a greedy family, but I found a life of peace. If you take anything from my words, let it be this. You too deserve a life that feels like freedom.